Hi folks, thanks for listening to my presentation on getting started with grid design and Ellen Lupton's wonderful book, Thinking Through Type. Before I get started talking about the materials from the book, I want to remind you to look at the reading responses and the reading prompts that I give you in the detailed schedule as a way to put the course text to work to help you learn. I've got some ideas here that are directly cut and pasted from those materials. The goal here is to help you read carefully, to learn from the readings and put them to work, theory to practice. That's always my goal. Grids are a really important part of graphic design. It doesn't take a long time of familiarizing yourself with grids to learn to see them everywhere. And that's one of the key goals that we have through working with thinking through type here. Can you learn how to see the grids that underlie so much graphic design? Can you learn to use grids to help you develop your own ideas? And can you put grids to work creatively? And as usual, we're just getting started. There's so much material to cover. If we want to go back to this later in the semester, we can. As you know, I'll be taking surveys and doing some other work to figure out the sense of the house to help you guys decide what you want to go back to. Now, just because grids can help you in a lot of ways doesn't mean that using a grid design is always the best solution. The template flyer that we looked at earlier this semester, well, that's a grid. And so we can't simply say, oh, a grid is going to solve our problems. We have to look at the other ways of thinking about design: alignment, contrast, repetition, proximity, color theory, all of that stuff. And of course, even before you put pen to paper, we want to think about audiences. Our goal is always, who are our users and what are their tasks? As you work through Lupton's book, you can approach it in a couple different ways. She gives you direct instruction on how to put grids to work, but her book is also an incredible example. Not only does she say, hey, here's ways that you can use grids, but she uses grids too. So look how Lupton bridges the theory practice gap. She uses grids not only as a writer, but as a designer. This isn't only about the places where she calls out grids, even though those are wonderful sections of the text to work from. It's where it's even the small little examples from other parts of the text, such as here on 164. I've scanned and cropped a tiny part of the text, but you can see here grids are all over the place. And what I really love about this particular example is you can see how grids and alignment work together. Even though everything here is either left justified or full justified, it really works as a complete system. Now, one of the things Lupton helps us do is understand grids historically, and this work is super important because grids were always understood even before modern type design came along as a way to deliver text efficiently. So this is a quote from Ellen here where she talks about design being about the management of text, solid blocks of text like you'll see in a Bible or an old book. And guess what? We see all this stuff today. Newspapers, lots of different texts that are created are still about giant blocks of type. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's important to understand the history of this and think about ways that as designers we can position our work against this history to make our work more interesting. One thing I really like about Lupton's work is how she talks about grids as an interface. I'm going to read the quote here. With print's ascent, margins became the user interface of the book. Because we do so much work on computers, it's easy to think about things like the web as user interfaces. Well, grids are all over the web. One of the interesting things to do is to think about the way that grids came from print into the web and then go back to print and think about the way that print is an interface. This type of comparative work can be really generative because it can help you think about the ways that technology constrains us as designers, and then think about ways you can be creative, either putting constraints to work or finding ways to get past them. Lupton talks about Swiss designers who, after World War II and the tragedies that unfolded across the entire continent, saw grids as a way to restore harmony and order, and privilege design as a way to show the promise of culture in the face of something that was very terrible. Something as simple as asymmetry was a way to use space in a way that had not been used before. And so that newness became a way to look forward. Now, the Swiss designers weren't the only folks who saw grids as supporting a rational, regular approach to design. And there were some American designers, as Lupton mentions, who pushed back against this. But there were plenty who saw immense value in the regularity, rationality, and systematic nature of grids. And here I've highlighted some of these things that I'll read out loud. A unity of design elements, a mathematically constructed grid, objective photography, a clear and factual manner, free from the exaggerated claims of commercial advertising. So there were lots of designers who saw grids as restoring a truthiness to design that hadn't been there for a very long time. Throughout the book, I hope you'll appreciate the way that Lupton diagrams grids. I've got two examples here, and there's many, many more, where she uses red lines to show where the grids are. And of course, I've done the same thing in this presentation. I encourage you to do this work. Find some designs and see if you can trace the grids and see the underlying structures that designers are working with. Part of the reason for this is today's design software like InDesign, Canva, even Microsoft Word supports the approach to grids, which is highly structural. Here are a couple quotes from Lupton, page 198, where she gets into InDesign on a very systematic level and talks about the ways the interface is designed to support grids. Look on the right side here. She has numbers 1824, 1418, 812. These are the size of the type and the leading, which is the space between the type. Notice that everything here is a multiple of 6. And when you do this kind of system, this makes a mathematical approach to grids actually work as part of your design. Do you have to do that? No. But many people try to do this because it can help them be more efficient and effective, which again, some people see as the point of grids as a whole. Design software supports grids in lots of different ways. Here's an image of design software with the grids hidden. Here's the same image of design software with the grids showing. This is InDesign, and you can notice the different colors of grids here. Some are for type, some are for objects, some are the borders of pages. Every design software supports this at some level. The point is, grids are so influential that they're baked into the software. And so if you learn how to use grids, you have a tremendous advantage in terms of getting your work done. One other way to get your work done is to look at the help on lynda.com, which is now LinkedIn Learning. And you can use lynda.com by going to the LinkedIn Learning website and logging in with the Purdue boiler key or single sign-on. If you search for grid design, you can find out very quickly that there's tons and tons of things to look at here. And as you can see from the screenshot, it's InDesign, it's typography, it's lots of other sources, and even things like the heritage of Swiss design is part of what is shared on lynda.com. Thanks for listening to this presentation on grids. I hope it's helped you think about ways that Lupton's book can be useful for you this semester. Please go to Brightspace Discussions, look for an activity about grids, complete the activity, and share any questions that you have about the way to make grids work for you, or things that you see in the Lupton text that you just want to talk more about.